Please welcome our next speaker, Neil Benson, a Scrum coach. Today, Neil will be presenting his session, Pitch2Win, Scope, Estimate, and Win, Agile PP Projects. Please stick around after Neil's session for a live Q&A.
Welcome to my DynamicsCon 2021 session, Pitch2Win, how to scope, estimate, and pitch Power Platform projects. This isn't a technical session where you'll learn how to build Power Platform applications. There are lots of those at DynamicsCon. This session is about how to build compelling proposals and win projects. This is the only session like it at DynamicsCon. If you're a practice leader, business developer, marketer, pre-sales consultant, solution architect, or business analyst, then you're at the right session. I want to start off by acknowledging that you have an awful lot of great content to choose from here at DynamicsCon. I'm grateful that you've chosen to invest your time in my Pitch2Win session. I promise to do my best to make it non-boring and filled with actionable insights. I'm Neil Benson from Customery, and my mission is to help Microsoft partners and customers build amazing agile business applications. I've been a Microsoft MVP since 2010 and practicing Scrum since 2008. You're welcome to listen to my podcast, Amazing Applications, which you'll find at amazingapps.show, and enroll in my free Agile Foundations for Microsoft Business Apps course at customery.academy. This is a story about two proposals for QFund. They're a fictitious Microsoft Business Applications customer. They use the Power Platform, or they're going to use the Power Platform to replace a complicated but not overly complex legacy application. It's the kind of 6 to 9 month project that a lot of us love to work on. QFund has asked their incumbent IT service provider, Hinchinbrook. It's the type of 6 to 9 month project that a lot of us love to work on. QFund has asked their incumbent IT service provider, Hinchinbrook, to provide a proposal, and they've invited a local Power Platform specialist, Reds, to submit a proposal too. Let's take a look. Hinchinbrook has been in business for 30 years, and they're a well-established multi-vendor IT services provider, and they've been working with QFund for the last 7 years, and they support the legacy application that QFund is replacing. Hinchinbrook has been deploying Dynamics 365 solutions for years and has been slowly evolving that practice to encompass the Power Platform. Hinchinbrook's proposal was prepared by Linda. She's Hinchinbrook's account manager for QFund, and she's been there for the last 4 years. She's prepared a proposal that's 45 pages and submitted it to QFund last week. It starts off with version control, and I've no idea why. Version control might be important for some official records, but not for sales proposals, and definitely not on page 2. It's the last thing that QFund is interested in. Stick it on the last page if you have to have it at all. The next section is the acceptance section. In 25 years, I've never seen a client sign a Microsoft Partners acceptance page in a proposal and send it back to them. If the proposal is accepted, there'll be a services agreement and a statement of work. That's what gets accepted and signed, hopefully digitally, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. Up next, 2 pages of the tables of contents, automatically generated from Word on every heading 1 and heading 2 in the document. What a waste of space. A table of contents should have maybe a dozen lines and invite readers in, not turn them away with a wall of text. Finally, the good part. Linda's written a 2-page executive summary. The only problem is that she's forgotten to answer any of the questions that QFund's executives want answered when they read Hinchinbrook's proposal. They don't really want to know the background or how long QFund has been working with Hinchinbrook. A summary of the proposed project's phases isn't bad, but what they really want to know is, how long will it take? What resources does Hinchinbrook need QFund to provide? A business case is an internal document that a stakeholder prepares in order to persuade decision makers that an investment is worthwhile. They're normally confidential and not shared externally. They use internal data such as rates of pay and profit margins to calculate the possible cost savings or profit improvements that could result from the new business application. None of that data was shared with Linda. What she's done is taken a short list of features and titled it Business Case. An employee self-service portal isn't a benefit, let alone a quantified one. That's just a feature. Oh, dear Linda. The next section is the proposed approach. Hinchinbrook uses Microsoft Dynamics SureStep with its 5 implementation phases: analysis, design, build, deploy, and operate. Linda doesn't mention that SureStep was retired by Microsoft in 2012, and she's got Silverlight installed on her computer so that she can access the SureStep application on her PC. Now we're getting to the section the executives are interested in, the costs. Hinchinbrook has split the project into 5 phases, each with the 5 SureStep phases. Hinchinbrook couldn't estimate some phases, so they've just left them blank. There was no total cost provided for the whole project, so the reader had to whip out a calculator, add up the estimates for each stage, even the ones that are blank. Don't make your reader do the work, Linda. Then there's a breakdown of the day rates and for each task and each phase and each stage. 7 pages of improbably precise figures in dollars and cents, and a lot of caveats and assumptions, and my eyes are starting to glaze over. And if I thought that the investment detail was a tough slog, here's the software licensing section. And to be fair to Linda, Microsoft's licensing complexity makes these sections very difficult to write. Linda's done a reasonable job of keeping it to 1 page. In the next section, we learn more about Hinchinbrook. I'm not sure that Hinchinbrook's IBM, Oracle, Google, or SAP credentials have any value in a Microsoft proposal, though. And there's no personality here, nothing that helps me understand what differentiates them from other Microsoft partners. Hinchinbrook's a big company with a lot of capabilities, but who am I going to be working with, and what's their experience? We're into the appendices now. Terms and conditions might feel like they're obligatory, but like I said earlier, clients don't sign sales proposals. I'd prefer if Linda referred me to Hinchinbrook's standard services agreement where the real terms and conditions are contained. I'm not sure if QFund asked about Hinchinbrook's support service, but Linda has included it, just to be sure. It's a standard-looking set of service desk capabilities, nothing remarkable here. Finally, and I think Linda repeated this here just to wind me up, is another boilerplate document about Microsoft Dynamics SureStep. Born in 2007, died in 2012 under mysterious circumstances. What did QFund think of Hinchinbrook's proposal? Well, it was a bland design using a standard Microsoft Word template. It contained walls of justified text that are challenging to read, and there were very few illustrations or visually compelling features for the readers. But worst of all, it failed to answer QFund's most important questions. How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? What internal resources will Hinchinbrook need to get the project done? And almost unforgivably for an incumbent provider, it doesn't remind QFund of the amazing team that Hinchinbrook has. QFund is left feeling that Hinchinbrook might send in new, different team members to implement this latest Power Platform application. And QFund will have to start all over with a different set of resources who don't know QFund's business. Overall, QFund gave Linda's proposal a 4 out of 10. That's a terrible score for any Microsoft customer to rate the proposal from their incumbent provider. Overall, QFund gave Linda's proposal a 4 out of 10. That's a terrible score for any Microsoft customer to rate the proposal from their current Microsoft partner. With a score that low, if QFund has an alternative proposal, Hinchinbrook is likely to get the boot. Before we look at the alternative proposal, I must talk about Hinchinbrook's SureStep approach for a moment. Microsoft Dynamics SureStep was a methodology designed with good intentions, but I worked alongside Microsoft consultants on several SureStep projects, and none of these projects was particularly successful. I find SureStep flawed because it's based on 7 false assumptions. If you're a Microsoft Power Platform partner, you might not even have heard of SureStep. You've got no idea about this retired old methodology that I'm going on about. But even if you're not using Dynamics SureStep, you might be using something like it. If you're writing requirement specifications, if you're documenting designs before building any software, if you've got project managers managing resources, if you've got users involved in workshops at the start of the project for requirements gathering, and then at the end of the project for acceptance testing, if you've got someone assigning tasks to developers and telling them how to meet a requirement, if you're conducting post-implementation reviews, if any of your projects share those characteristics, then you're using an approach that's similar to SureStep. Here are the 7 false assumptions of plan-based sequential approaches. Your users know exactly what they need and what they want your Power Platform apps to do at the start of the project, even though they've probably never seen Power Apps before. They can somehow, unambiguously, completely, and accurately express their needs. Your business analysts can take all those requirements that the users have suggested and write them down in documents that can be faithfully understood by the architects, even if your business analysts have no previous experience working with these users in this organization before. And your stakeholders will be able to understand and approve the requirement specification document. Your application architects can translate those requirements into high-fidelity designs that will work perfectly in production without wasting any time on prototypes. Developers can convert the architect's designs into working software simply by implementing the technical design specification and referring to the requirements documents. We told the users they won't be needed again until it's time for acceptance testing, so the developers don't have to or need to interact with the users. Building complex business applications can follow a defined process where you get predictable set of outcomes, that is working features, because the inputs, that is the requirements, are always consistent, as if you're following a recipe for making pizza. And we'll do a better job in the next project by conducting a post-implementation review at the end of this project. But there's no room for improvement or time for adapting how we work until then. And it's okay not to release any working software until every last feature is working and ready for a big bang production deployment. Testing's really hard, so we should minimize the number of production deployments. It's less risky this way. Traditional approaches like this are known as waterfall approaches. They get that name because, like the steps in this waterfall, our project tumbles down the stages in a one-way trip. Microsoft Dynamics SureStep is a classic example of a sequential, linear waterfall process. We try to make it impossible to change the requirements once they've been approved and design has started. And it's difficult to change the design after the design specification has been signed off and the development has started. And it's shockingly expensive to find a bug during deployment when the analysis, design, and development phases are all complete. Oh, but that's probably enough about SureStep for now. I'm going to need more paper bags if Hinchinbrook keep proposing waterfalls. How about a picture of this beautiful waterfall to help us all calm down again? This is the only kind of waterfall I enjoy. Moving on from waterfalls, let's take a look at their proposal that QFund got from another Microsoft partner, Reds. Reds was formed 6 years ago by a team of SharePoint experts, and they've expanded their services to include business apps built on the Power Platform. Their proposal was prepared by Ron, their business development executive. He submitted a 27-page proposal to QFund at the same time as Linda from Hinchinbrook submitted hers. The Reds proposal starts off strong with a compelling value proposition that helps position Reds in the minds of QFund's executives. Does your Microsoft partner business have an easy-to-remember value proposition? Customer E's mission is to help Microsoft customers and partners build amazing Microsoft business applications using an Agile approach. Then Ron has included the standard Microsoft Word table of contents. Please don't do that. They are just plain ugly. I wouldn't usually recommend a background section. They're normally a rehash of your understanding of the customer's requirements, which they already know. But in this case, Reds know they're up against QFund's incumbent IT provider, so it makes sense. It shows that Reds have been listening and they understand their prospective customers' desired outcomes, even though they haven't established a working relationship yet. Executives reading this proposal who weren't part of any of those briefing workshops with Reds will know where they're coming from. Reds have taken a slightly risky approach. They've opted not to provide a proposal for building QFund's Power Platform applications. Instead, they've decided to limit their proposal to the discovery exercise. It seems like Reds don't have sufficient information about the business apps that QFunds wants to replace and aren't in a position to provide an estimate yet. This is a pragmatic approach, but it leaves their proposal vulnerable to other partners who do feel able to provide an estimate for the entire project. The discovery exercise sounds a little too much like the analysis and design phases from a SureStep project, but let's see where it goes. This is more like it. In the approach section, Reds have described how they use the Scrum framework to build business apps. Except that Reds say their approach is based on Scrum, but it's not actually Scrum. They've changed the names of some of Scrum's components. They're confused about their preferred sprint length, and there are several parts missing from the Scrum framework in their proposed approach. For example, they don't mention any of Scrum's accountabilities, like Scrum Master or Product Owner or developers. And I think it's important to let Microsoft customers know that they'll be providing a Product Owner to the Scrum team. And that's usually a full-time position. I don't get why teams say they practice Scrum, but they only adopt part of it and then change the names of some of its components. That's like saying we're experts in the Power Platform, but we call it Power Workflow instead of Power Automate, and we build Lightning apps instead of Canvas apps. Things have a name. If you adopt a thing, use its name and try and keep up when Microsoft changes the names. Then they had short examples of some of their design artifacts: solution architecture, a user flow diagram, a data model, and a project roadmap. Personally, I think it's important to include illustrations and diagrams in our proposals. Red's proposal for the discovery exercise is relatively small, just a couple of weeks' effort for a single consultant, so the expected investment is relatively modest, which makes it easy for QFund to say yes to Red's proposal and engage with them. A SureStep analysis and design project would usually have taken months, so at least it's not that. I would have liked to see Reds use their expertise to provide QFund with some budgetary costs for the full application build-out. Something like, based on our work with other clients in your industry with similar requirements, your Power Platform application development could take 6 to 9 months and cost $300K to $500K. We'll provide you with an updated estimate based on your requirements during this discovery exercise. The About the Reds section highlights Red's expertise with various Microsoft products. And I love how it continues the long tradition of Microsoft partners using Microsoft product logos without giving us stuff about Microsoft rules for how to use their logos. Not everyone will read the assumptions section, but I think it's worth including. You should normally have a few boilerplate assumptions based on how you prepare your proposals, plus some assumptions specific to this proposal. These are often good talking points for negotiating statements of work when you're shortlisted. The Reds were clever with this section. They called it Meet the Reds. First of all, they named and included photographs of the people involved in the engagement. They included Ron, the business development executive, Andy, the consultant who would be performing the work, and his manager, Gemma, who would be providing technical review and oversight. I would have liked to see a bit more color about how each person's expertise would contribute to a successful project, but this is a great foundation. Reds also illustrate their local team, differentiating themselves as a Microsoft partner with on-the-ground expertise and local talent. The photographs are all professional headshots with the same lighting and background. I'm still not a fan of including terms and conditions in the proposal. Proposals are not the right place for legal jargon. We have services agreements and statements of work where we describe that stuff. Reds have included a statement about how they work, and I really like it. In it, they describe the types of clients they enjoy working with, why they believe that fixed scope proposals are not in their clients' best interests, why working with local consultants is beneficial to their clients, and other distinguishing core values. It's a subtle way of differentiating themselves and setting up some guardrails at the same time. Their value proposition, use of evocative language, and letting QFund know who they'll be working with helped differentiate Reds from their competition. It was visually interesting with more images, illustrations, and photographs, but there were still areas of improvement, like the Calibri font and the table of contents, but not a bad effort at all. But it still didn't answer QFund executives' three critical questions. How long is the Power Platform solution going to take to build? How much is it going to cost? And what resources will we need to invest alongside Reds in the project? Overall, QFunds gave Red a 6 out of 10. That's 50% better than Hinchinbrook, but it leaves far too much space for a third competitor to nudge them into a distant second place. I have to tell you, I've got a bit of a soft spot for the proposal from Reds. After all, their name reminds me of probably the best scrum team in Super Rugby here in Australia, but maybe I'm a little biased. Even though it was a lot better than Hinchinbrook's proposal, the Reds proposal only scored 6 out of 10. How could we improve on it? What would an amazing, compelling proposal need to look like to win QFund's project? Based on what we've seen in Hinchinbrook's and Red's proposals, amazing proposals should be differentiated. They bring out our value proposition, they bring it to life, and they make it impactful for our prospective customer. It gives them insight into our perspective and experience and sets us apart from other Microsoft partners. They're visual. They're not based on standard Microsoft Word templates written in Calibri. Try using PowerPoint, Sway, or even Canva if you need a different medium to express a better design. Invest in visual elements such as diagrams, illustrations, and photographs. Hire a graphic designer if you don't have the resources internally. They should propose an Agile approach. There's really no excuse for proposing SureStep or any other Waterfall approach in 2021. Most customers are demanding, or at least expecting, an Agile approach to building business apps. And those that aren't deserve to learn about Agile from you. Lastly, it should be personal. Help the reader connect with your team by including their photographs and bios. You don't need to include a 4-page CV for every possible team member. At the Big Four consultancy I worked for, every time our names were included in a proposal, we'd have to write a custom bio, about 50 words, describing how our expertise and experience would help this project reach their business goals. But for the rest of this section, we're going to focus on the big thing that was missing from both those proposals. And that was the answer to those 3 little questions. How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? What internal resources do you need us to provide? If you can answer those 3 questions and your proposal is differentiated, visually interesting, your approach is agile, and you help your prospect connect with your team, then you'll have a compelling proposal. I'm going to show you how to use 3 visuals to answer those 3 questions. A user story map, which will help you illustrate the scope and the priorities, a release burndown chart that will illustrate the costs and timeline, and a project resource chart to illustrate the people working on the project. Let's start with the user story map. Who knows what a product backlog is? In Agile software development, the product backlog is a list of everything we need our business application to do. It's ordered by our customer's product owner, which means the items with the highest priority and value are at the top. At this stage in the project, before we started building anything, we want the requirements to be big, high-level features. I've found that 10 to 100 requirements in a product backlog at this stage is manageable, depending on the scale of the application. But of course, most prospects don't send you the requirements as a well-structured product backlog. And even if you can organize your prospective clients' requirements into a product backlog, there are a couple of challenges. It's not easy to tell which stakeholder or department has requested each of the items in the backlog. Have we left anyone out? Are there business owners we've overlooked? What about the non-functional requirements from the IT department or the industry regulator? And secondly, we don't know whether it's complete. Do our requirements cover all the business processes our Power Platform application is intended to support? One answer to these issues is a user story map. A user story map is a two-dimensional visualization of our product backlog. It illustrates the scope and priorities of our business application. It's great for helping our customers and stakeholders reach consensus about what's in and what's important. And it forms the basis of estimating timelines, costs, and resources. Here's an example user story map. It's got 63 high-level requirements arranged into 3 releases. There's a 4th slice at the bottom of the requirements. These are requirements that didn't get prioritized into any release, so they're out of scope for our application. It's a little small, so let's zoom in. Here's release 1. You can see each of the stakeholders' avatars just above the blue cards. In this way, we can see which features will be delivered to each stakeholder in each release. And we can easily scan the list of stakeholders to see if we've missed anyone out. The yellow cards represent the high-level business process activities. The white cards represent high-level requirements. Each one has a short title with more detail behind it. If we turn over the card, an icon to help us categorize the requirements, and the relative effort for each requirement estimated by the developers. The total estimated effort for this release is 100 points, and we'll take a look at what that means in just a moment. Here's a physical user story map one of my teams used to help our stakeholders visualize the scope and timelines of our project to implement a complex set of Power Platform applications. This story map is about 10 meters wide, wrapping around 2 walls in this conference room, and it's over 2 meters tall. It's a great place to meet our project stakeholders and discuss scope, priority, and sequence. And it also led to a new phrase, on the skirting board, which means that the requirement has been pushed so far down, out of scope, it's never going to get done. Now that we know how much effort it'll take to complete each release and the entire project to build our application, we can use a release burndown chart to visualize how long it'll take and how much it'll cost. The work remaining in story points runs up the y-axis, and the duration in sprints runs along the x-axis. From our user story map, we add a vertical bar representing the amount of work in each release in story points. In this example, release 1 is 100, release 2 is 200, and release 3 is 100 story points, 400 story points in total. To calculate the duration of release 1, the developers estimate their velocity. In this example, they estimate that they can get done 40 points per sprint. Done here means that all the work needed to get a feature designed, developed, tested, and deployed into production. At 40 points per sprint, it'll take 2.5 sprints to complete release 1. Our estimated velocity is often a little optimistic. It's hard for us to imagine all the impediments that might delay our development. I like to use a second velocity that's a little lower than the first. In this example, let's use 30 points per sprint instead of 40. At a velocity of 30, it'll take just over 3 sprints to get release 1's 100 points done. That gives us a landing zone for release 1 between 2.5 and 3.3 sprints, which I'll round up to between 3 and 4 sprints. That gives us a landing zone for release 1 between 2.5 and 3.3 sprints, which I'll round up to between 3 and 4 sprints. We repeat this to predict the landing zones for release 2 and 3. Notice that even though release 3 is smaller than release 2, the landing zone is bigger. This is the law of large estimates. Our estimates become less precise as the project scale increases. Our release burndown chart now answers the question, how long will it take? It'll take 10 to 14 sprints. That's 20 to 28 weeks. How much is it going to cost? I knew you were going to ask that. Hold on just a moment and I'll show you. Estimating costs in an Agile project is much easier than a traditional project. In a Scrum team, we have a stable group of developers who've got all the skills needed to turn backlog items into application increments plus a Scrum Master. The cost per sprint is the number of developers times their daily rate times the number of days in a sprint. In this example, we have 5 resources, the 4 developers and Scrum Master. Their average daily rate is $800 a day, and their average utilization is 90%, considering leave and other non-project work, which is 9 days in each 2-week sprint. The burn rate, or cost per sprint, is therefore $36,000. We can plot the cumulative cost on the x-axis alongside the duration. And now we can answer the question, how much will it cost? It'll cost $360,000 to $504,000, depending on the velocity our proposed team of 5 is able to achieve. As the project progresses, you can use the release burndown chart to update your estimated costs and duration each sprint. Here's the chart after 6 sprints. Release 1 was successfully deployed to production during sprint 4, right around when we predicted. Release 2, which we predicted would land in sprint 9 or 10, now looks like it'll land in sprint 10. But look what's happened to release 3. Our customer has increased the scope from 100 to 150 points. This additional effort will push out the landing from sprints 10 to 14 to sprints 13 to 15. And the estimated costs have increased from between $360,000 and $504,000 to somewhere between $468,000 and $540,000. But in sprint 7, our customer's product owner has conferred with their stakeholders and found a way of deferring some functionality from release 3 in order to get it deployed earlier. Now it looks like it'll land in sprint 11 or 12 at a cost of $396,000 to $468,000. Happy days! What was the next question? Oh, that's right, internal resources. Customers want to know how many people you're expecting them to provide to the project and what their roles and responsibilities are and how much they'll be needed. The project resources chart is a simple illustration. Let's look at a couple of examples. In this example, the customer is being asked to provide a project manager, a product owner, and a change lead. The Microsoft partner is providing an architect, a delivery team of 5, plus a quality lead. In this one, my favorite, the Microsoft partner, Justice League, is providing 4 developers and a Scrum Master, and they're expecting Diana, the customer's operations manager, to act as the Wonder Woman product owner. But what do you do if your corporate branding is a little more formal? Maybe you've got corporate headshots instead of Lego Justice League movie characters. Your project structure might look more traditional. The photographs, the personalized statements, and the contact still information still let your team's personalities into your proposals. But I wish there was more information about the roles the customer was expected to fulfill and not just the partner. So, what have we learned in this session? We've learned that compelling proposals are amazing because they are differentiated. They set you apart from the alternatives. They're visually attractive because they use images, diagrams, and photographs and avoid walls of text. And they propose an agile approach that will reduce costs, shrink timelines, mitigate risks, and enable your team to build amazing applications that everyone will love. And they let the personalities of your people and business shine through. More importantly, they answer these 3 important questions. How long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? We answered those questions with a user story map and a release burndown chart. And what resources do we need? We answered that question with a project resource chart. Thanks so much for choosing this Pitch to Win session. I hope you found it enlightening, intriguing, and actionable. I hope your next proposal is a winner. I'm available now in the live Q&A if you have any questions, or you can follow up with me on any of my socials. Thank you very much.
How are you all doing? Hi, good morning everybody. It's 6 a.m. on St. Patrick's Day. I'm here on vacation in Australia and there's a big storm blowing outside. How are you doing? I'm here in Australia. It's 6 a.m. in the morning. It's St. So we've had some questions in the chat. Thank you very much for those. Jeffrey's asked a great question about estimating the team's initial velocity. And that's one of the really tricky parts of this approach, is that the team needs to estimate their initial velocity in the story mapping workshop. The best way I've found to do that is to get those developers together, take one of the epic user stories that looks relatively straightforward, and figure out how many sprints it would take to get that epic done. And if that's an epic that they know reasonably well, they've seen that type of epic before, maybe they've delivered it on previous projects, then that's our baseline, and we can use that to then set the estimated velocity for the rest of the user stories and the rest of the sprints. If your team doesn't have sufficient experience in order to be able to estimate that, then you might not have the right team. It would strike me as odd that you can deliver a successful proposal if your team can't estimate one of those epic user stories. If it's a domain they've got no experience in, or technology they've got no experience in, or a type of requirement they've never seen before, then you're going to have a hard time implementing that project. So hopefully they do have sufficient experience and they can go ahead and set a baseline estimate. Let me see what other questions we have. But yeah, you do need to be able to answer those questions, I think, in the proposal, how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. And you can refine that after you get started. So that's the approach I let my customers know, is here's our rough estimates based on what you've told us so far and what we've been able to estimate. And we're going to refine the estimated duration and the estimated costs after, I normally recommend about 3 sprints. That's about 6 weeks once you accumulate some real live data. Normally the estimates will go up because there's things we uncover, but sometimes they'll go down if the customer figures out they can simplify their requirements and reduce the scope. Nick would like to know if there is a sample proposal that I can share. It's a great idea. I'll need to try and build an example, maybe a template that I can share with you in a future session to give you a head start in developing something like this. Jeffrey, yes, building a user story map isn't, you can do it in a couple of hours. You can build a high-level user story map, even if all you've got is some requirements in a request for proposal. I've been able to turn those bits of paper into a very rough user story map. The problem with RFPs and the requirements that they contain is they're very rarely ordered in a prioritized sequence. So you're going to have to make some assumptions there. If you do have access to your customer's team and you're able to spend a few hours workshopping with them, I've built user story maps in a couple of hours. Sometimes it takes a couple of days, but it really just depends upon the scale of the project at that stage. Let's see what other questions we have. How do you estimate what the cutoff for the first sprint is? Do you need a prototype for review at that point? Certainly, Justin, thanks for your question. A prototype can help. It does a couple of things. It helps you confirm some of the user's requirements. It helps you start working together as a team, both your developers and your developers working with this particular customer. And it gets them some exposure to the Power Platform technologies as well. So if you do have some breathing room to build a prototype or some kind of proof of concept, that can be really useful. And it can help you establish what your velocity might be in the remaining sprints. So if you have some time to do that, that'd be great. In terms of cutoff for your first sprint, I'm not quite sure what you're aiming at there with your question, whether it's about the duration of your sprint. I love 1 week sprints, certainly for small projects, proof of concepts, and prototyping. 1 week sprint is great. If you can't achieve a 1 week sprint, every sprint during the rest of the project, then a 2 week sprint is a great alternative. Some teams run a longer sprint, 3 or 4 weeks, or even a calendar month. I think that's too long. The gap between feedback and sessions in the sprint reviews is just too long, and you don't get enough feedback. So I recommend shorter sprints where possible. Yes, Justin, you do need to get Waterfall out of your muscle memory. It's going to hold you back. John, how critical are the graphic design elements? Yeah, it's not a skill that a lot of Power Platform partners have on board, but you can certainly outsource those graphic design elements. I picked them up on Fiverr, on Upwork, and use experts on there for just a couple of dollars and get some templates built. I find that once they've built something in PowerPoint for me, I can really manipulate that myself. And there's another Microsoft MVP, changesuperhero.com.au has got some amazing PowerPoint templates. You can find all of those. I think for $35, you can get about 100 templates for all of those different types of charts. Really spices up your proposals. Merlin asks, do I consider the statement of work, the proposal as the statement of work? No, I think they're separate. I think the statement of work is a legal document. It forms part of your contract. The proposal is the basis for the statement of work. So the statement of work will include those charts of how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, who's going to be involved. That will be contained within your statement of work. But the statement of work can be that document that is slightly drier, harder to read, doesn't have all the images in it, and your proposal should have all the sizzle, whereas the statement of work is going to be a contractual document. Let's see what else. David would like to know, do I utilize SureStep? No, David, I don't know if you missed the earlier in the presentation, but I'm not a fan of SureStep. Microsoft retired it in 2012, and I've worked alongside Microsoft at clients like the BBC and the Royal Bank of Scotland, both of those in London many, many years ago when SureStep was just launching, and those projects were not successful. The requirements analysis and design phase at the BBC had to be rerun several times because the documentation just didn't match what the customer expected. And at the Royal Bank of Scotland, I spent over 12 months in the analysis and design phases, and all we produced was documentation. It was probably closer to 18 months before the customer before the teams started building any software, and several years before they had any software ready for deployment. So I don't recommend sequential plan-based approaches like that anymore at all. It just takes way too long to get from the start to some working software, and for the first half of the project, all you've got is a bunch of documentation and no value delivered at all. Let's see, questions are coming in thick and fast. I'll try and keep up. We've got another 15 minutes, so we should get through them. Jeffrey, the first story map that you use in the proposal is often based on the requirements in the RFP. It can be, Jeffrey, that's not ideal, but if that's all you've got, I quite often find in public sector proposals, working with government, procurement teams, there is no access to the users. You're not allowed to have any kind of discussion. And if you do ask any clarification questions, the answers to those are shared with all of your competitors. So that can make life really tricky. If that's all you've got, and that's the situation that you're in, then you might be able to turn the RFP requirements into a user story map. But I try and avoid those projects. They're fraught with danger and very hard to make successful. So much better if you're working with a commercial customer where there aren't those kind of restrictions, and you can get in and work with the users, even if it's just for a day, to do some user story mapping workshops and build that iteratively with them. What are the key selling points when bidding against a Salesforce solution? Great question, David. So the purpose of this presentation isn't focused on that topic about helping you outbid Salesforce. There are some technical benefits working with the Microsoft Power Platform. It's a very low cost of ownership, a very easy skill set for customers to learn, which I often find is a great selling point against Salesforce. And the Microsoft applications, first-party applications with Dynamics 365 are obviously very strong as well and stand up really well against Salesforce. And I think Microsoft, for the first time in a long time, is out-innovating Salesforce. We're building features that Salesforce is adding a year later, and that hasn't happened for a long time. We've got things like customer insights and sales insights that Salesforce just can't touch yet. Their Einstein AI solution is a long way behind us. So there's some great technical benefits there. But Salesforce does a really good job at selling, and they invest a lot of pre-sales resources. So we're up against them when it comes to that. So we need to think about the opportunities that we bid for and bid really strongly. Jeffrey, the other MVP site, let me just look it up. I think it's going to be Change Superhero. Yeah. I will paste that in the chat. Jeffrey, the other MVP site, just look it up. So, great site with lots of, it's a focus on change management with lots of really visually compelling PowerPoint slides around communicating complex change programs, but I've used those for building project team charts and all sorts of stuff as well. All the templates are free, but I find it easier to download them all at once by paying $35 and getting access to the entire bundle. Mark, great question. How do you convince CFOs that the project budget is a range? I think that can be a difficult one for a lot of customers. They just want to know what your one number is, and trying to convince them that it's a range can be pretty tough. So you need to just, if you're only allowed to provide one number, you've got to choose then, do you use the midpoint in between the upper and lower bounds of your estimated duration and cost, or do you want to play it really conservative and go for the highest estimated cost? And that's certainly the safest thing to do. The other way to do it is to use the lowest cost estimate and hope you can stick it. That's a slightly higher risk approach, but obviously it's a more competitive one. So you need to figure out what to do in those circumstances. Chad, how do you deal with a customer with no product owner capability in their business? That's a great question. I've faced that situation only once or twice. It doesn't happen too often. Look, some Microsoft partners would engage anyway, and they would provide an experienced business analyst as a proxy for the customer's product owner. I find that a fraught approach. I wouldn't do it. I would remind the customer that they've said that this is a strategic project. It's very important for them. There's going to be a huge ROI for them, and that they're going to need to release somebody from within their business to act as the product owner. Where they can't do that, I'd walk away. The chances of that project being successful are slim to none if there isn't somebody with sufficient authority, knowledge of the business, who's trusted by the leadership team to make those trade-offs in requirements prioritization. They don't need to be an expert in all of the business. We can find subject matter experts and pull them into workshops here and there. But that product owner does need to be sufficiently available, and that means at least a couple of days a week to work with your development team. And if the customer hasn't got that, I'd seriously reconsider whether that's a customer engagement worth pursuing. How important is DevOps in your projects? Automated testing and deployment. Yes, Jeffrey, it's a crucial capability. If you're going to adopt an Agile approach, then being able to automate a lot of the deployment and testing activities is crucial to increasing your team's velocity. I quite often find it doesn't, we don't start out with a lot of automation. We mature our DevOps capabilities sprint over sprint. Now, if your team has worked on other projects before where they can bring a lot of that experience in, that helps. You might find you're working with a customer's infrastructure team for the first time, and doing daily deployments is a novelty for them. They're going to have to go on a learning journey with you. So you're going to do some training and some hand-holding with your customer's infrastructure team. But building that automated test suite and a strong CI/CD pipeline to be able to do multiple releases a day, and certainly multiple releases a week, a sprint, is crucial. So it's definitely a skill set that goes hand in hand with taking an Agile approach. What other questions do we have? Azure DevOps spec map. Yes, thank you, Chad. That is another alternative to Stories on Board. The reason I used Stories on Board is because, ironically, for the last couple of years, my enterprise customers have both been Jira customers. I spent 2 years on one project, 3 years on another, and they were both heavily into Jira. Wasn't my choice, wasn't my favorite, but we used Stories on Board because it integrates with both Azure DevOps and Jira. And yeah, so you can use SpecMap if you're an Azure DevOps team, and it is an add-on for Azure DevOps. Justin wants to know if he listens to my podcast, will he instantly become a Scrum Master? The answer is no, unfortunately. So my podcast is the Amazing Applications podcast. It's amazingapps.show. I'd love you to join us and listen to that. We've had some great interviews recently and got several more to come. And there's also a huge back catalogue of how to build Agile applications in there. It's designed for everybody involved in building Power Platform applications, whether you're in sales and pre-sales, marketing even, and right through from architecture, analysis, developers, testers, trainers, the whole lot. There's a heavy theme there about building apps with an Agile approach. You don't have to take on Scrum or know anything about Scrum to get something out of the podcast. Well, thanks, Justin. Oh yeah, so Jeffrey, multiple product owners. That's the opposite of not having one product owner. You can make it work if there's somebody who's the chief product owner who's supported by a couple of other product owners. That's great, but having a committee where they all need to vote and resolve, some kind of conflict in the requirements, that's super tough. It just slows down decision making, and you quite often find that stories that were previously accepted, somebody wants to then come along next sprint and change. There's quite a lot of rework. It's definitely not a desirable position to be in, but I've made it work on a couple of projects where there was no alternative. Quite often we find that where we're deploying an enterprise application across an entire business, and there's multiple departments or divisions involved, there's just no way around it. There's nobody at the top who's got sufficient availability and trust. So you have to work with somebody from each division or department as their product owner. Jeffrey asks about Kanban versus Scrum. So I've used Kanban in a couple of situations. One where almost all the development has been done and we're entering into a small enhancements and maintenance phase. The budget's been wound right down and we've only got a couple of team members left. Kanban's a great approach for that, where most of the product backlog items could be bug fixes. And so we're just reaching a steady state of ongoing development. We can change our priorities a lot quicker with Kanban. And if an urgent bug comes up in production, we can drop one of our cards from the board and pick up that urgent bug and get it done really quickly. Whereas with Scrum, it's recommended that you commit to the sprint backlog for the duration of the sprint for a week or 2 weeks. It's a little bit harder to change your sprint backlog. Sprints in Scrum also work best when there's a sprint goal, so it's a clear unifying theme for that period, for that time box. Kanban doesn't have that. So if you're working, I've seen it in teams working on lots of small projects for lots of different Microsoft customers, they prefer Kanban. They can have a team of developers, and the priorities change from day to day. In that case, there's no product owner, and the team just responds to the different customer inquiries and prioritizes their work every day. And Kanban's a great approach for that as well. Mallory, thank you for your comments about the podcast. I really appreciate it. And Jeffrey, any insights on no estimates? And you saw it was in the podcast. So yeah, no estimates is another approach. So you'll had a great interview with Vasco Duarte, who wrote the No Estimates book, and it's an alternative approach. I mean, it really does have an estimate at the end of the day, but what we're trying to do there is break down the epic user stories. So they're all roughly the same size. So they'll all take about one sprint to complete. And therefore, you can just count the number of requirements that you have. If you had 63 requirements in your backlog, then your backlog is going to take 63 sprints to deliver. And again, you can figure out the costs based on your relatively fixed cost of running the team for one sprint. And that's how you get your estimates with the no estimates method. So Vasco goes into that in his interview in the Amazing Applications show. I think it's episode 25. And there's still a few days to enter my competition. If you visit customary.com/no estimates, then you'll be able to enter a competition to win a copy of Vasco's book. Thanks for that. All right, looks like we're getting towards the end of the questions. I'm here for another minute or two in case there's any further questions. See if we missed anything. No, I think we're all good. So really appreciate those really good questions, everybody. You've obviously been paying attention, thinking a lot about these kind of topics. I'd love to help whenever I can. So please do connect with me on LinkedIn, send me your questions. I do reserve the right to use your question in a future podcast episode. That's the danger of sending me an email through LinkedIn or on email. or you can leave me a voicemail on my website as well. There's a good chance you'll end up on my podcast. All right. Enjoy your St. Patrick's Day, everybody. It's, like I said, it's morning here on the 17th in Australia. I'm going to go out and try and find a pub with a pint of Guinness. I hope you'll enjoy your day too. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and we'll see you soon in Dynamics Con 2022 and beyond.